Thank you.
Oh, yes, and we
And
are
recording is
recording.
progress, and I must click OK. Okay. All right. Well, good evening, good afternoon, good morning to the folks in Tokyo. Hope everybody's doing well. Yeah, my name is Regge Life, and to introduce myself, I guess I have to kind of go back, but I got involved with Japan quite a number of years ago when I was studying film in New York City. I'm a graduate of the NYU Film School, and sort of back in the day, there was a wonderful movie theater not far from NYU called the Elgin that showed retrospectives of all the work by famous directors from all over the world. And so that became like a hangout spot for most of us students. We were, studying film, and most of us were not that interested in only American movies. So we would go to the Elgin to watch the masters of cinema and their epic work. And I became particularly interested and fascinated by the Japanese filmmakers that I saw there. And we're talking about old black and white Japanese movies by Naruse and Mizuguchi. In fact, they didn't even show Ozu. They showed Kurosawa, but they didn't show any Ozu movies that often there. So I didn't discover Ozu until later. But that first experience discovering those movies kind of put the bug in my head about Japan and filmmaking. Now, flash forward many, many years in movies and work in television. And I found out about this wonderful thing sponsored by the Japan-US Friendship Commission out of DC, where as an artist, you could go to Japan for 6 months and study, whatever you wanted to study, it was kind of open to you. It was a 6-month fellowship, fully supported and funded. And at that time, I was working in television, mostly in Hollywood and in New York. And though TV is quite a lucrative profession, it is extremely boring at times because the content of the work is pretty standardized. And I think most of us who watch American television know what I'm talking about. So I heard about this thing from actually a jazz musician friend who had just come back from doing the fellowship. And he said, you need a break. You need to get out of here. I know you're making money, but forget about the money for 6 months and go to Japan and do something that you're going to fall in love with. And so that's what I did. But it wasn't as easy as all that. I had to find a filmmaker to work with. And that's when the reality of what was going on in Japan hit. The Japanese economy was booming then. We're talking about the late 80s. And as a result, most of the movie studios had sold off their land to Ito Yokado and all the department stores because the land was so valuable now. They could make lots of money on it. So Japanese filmmakers were in this huge slump because nobody was making movies anymore. They were selling land for real estate deals. So there was one filmmaker whose work I didn't even know in America because it didn't really travel out of Japan, Yamada Yoji. And I was introduced to him through another filmmaker who I knew through New York. He made the introduction to Yamada Yoji's daughter, who was working at TBS in Tokyo. And through the two of them, they set it up that I could actually be a part of his epic film series, Torasan. So when I went to Japan finally in the kind of winter of 1990, I was supposed to go to 1990, and then I had a skiing accident and blew out my knee. So I ended up in the hospital. So I had to wait until the fall of 1990. But things happen for reasons because when I arrived, they were just getting ready to make the new Torasan. So that's how it all started for me. I worked with them kind of as an observer and doing things from time to time on the movie until it opened in December of that year. I later found out I was not only the only person, but the only foreigner who had ever witnessed a Torasan movie made from start to finish, and that no one had sort of been on the inside of the making of the secret sauce of Torasan. So that experience was quite special. It got me to know Mr. Yamada better and all the people and his crew and his staff. And we've continued our relationship up till this day. And this is now, what, 2025. So it's 35 years now that we've been friends and colleagues. And so that's how it all kind of started for me with that film. And now 5 films later that I've made in Japan, it's been an extremely interesting, rewarding. And just as Renee had told me in the beginning, something that brought me back to love what I was doing instead of just doing something because you're making money, which, is nice, but oftentimes hollow.
Yeah, that's quite an amazing journey. We always love hearing how our members end up getting interested in their field, and um, East Asian film was definitely one for me. I was able to take a course in college, but I think the only one of the only Japanese films that we watched was Rashomon. So we'll have to get a list from you later and maybe share with our members for them to watch as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you could put together a really nice film festival of old movies and new movies, and because it's tough making films even to this day in Japan. But when some really good films come out of Japan, they are really good movies. So yeah, happy to do that for you.
So over the course of either, your early days or the course of your career, do you have any favorite memories from this work in Japan?
Well, making the first film was probably the most interesting and the hardest one to do because I wanted to make a film about the experience of African Americans in Japan. From my fellowship time, I was meeting all these African Americans who essentially had packed up their bags and moved to Japan to live. I mean, and many of them were not your typical company supported employee for IBM or one of the big multinationals. They were on their own. They weren't living in I'm sure the people in Tokyo know what I'm talking about, the home out apartment, the American style big apartment with all the features to it. They were in your 3 LDK, 2 LDK, making it work. And it was fascinating to me, what drew them to Japan, why they wanted to stay, why they, professed to they were gonna, have their ashes spread out in the Sumida River at some day. So that was the first movie. And of course, at that time in Japan, late 80s, early 90s, was a time of great controversy about people of color. This was when the statements by the former Prime Minister Nakasone about, African Americans and Africans in general ruining the atmosphere in Japan. And so there were a series of statements made, and there was a perception that Japan would not be welcoming to African Americans. But this was exactly the opposite of what I was finding from the people I was working with. But again, when you're getting ready to make a movie about that in Japan, you're basically outing that whole thing, and people get nervous. You get used to the word chotto, when you suggest you want to do something, which basically means don't you want to change your mind? And so it was tough in the beginning, but again, I think one of the things that helped me again was the relationship that I had initially made with Mr. Yamada and the people that he opened doors to for me. And people would slide me things, secretly, no name attached, something in an envelope. But it was a clip of somebody saying something who they claimed they had never said that I could put in the program. So that first one was a tough one, but it was the one that, kind of let people know that I was serious about what I wanted to do. And I was also going to be fair about it. I wasn't going to bash the Japanese for what they were saying and doing, but I was going to kind of bring context to it. So you began to understand how these things happen, not only in Japan, but all over the world, our perceptions of the other. So, we finished the movie. I delivered it to NHK. They were going to show it. They agreed to show it. But because they were still so nervous about it, they said, okay, we'll show it at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday. The time when Japanese are out shopping or doing something else. So no one will see it. They can say they showed the movie and they were kind of, okay, we're off the hook now. And this was after my waiting and hanging around for them to give me a screening date, and I had to leave Tokyo and live in Osaka for a while because my lease ran out in Tokyo and I couldn't stay anymore. So someone I had met during the making of the movie said, I got a place in Osaka. Come down to Osaka for a while. You can hang out here and we'll give you money to ride the Shinkansen up to Tokyo every 2 weeks and remind them that they haven't given you a screening date. So they showed it at 3 and the switchboard lit up. It blew up. Like, what is this thing? We just caught the last 30 minutes. All right, we just caught 15 minutes. You better show it again. And NHK, responds to viewers. I mean, they're big on that. So suddenly, I had this meeting at NHK and they were saying, we need to show your movie again. And we're going to show it at prime time so everybody can see it. And that's what happened. But again, that was what was so nice about it. It opened the door. I followed up a few years later with a second movie, equally as controversial, called Doubles, about the children of Japanese and Americans. And those of you who've spent time in Japan know the whole thing of mixed blood is very touchy and sensitive. Um, but again, I handled it in a way that everybody felt like no one was being offended by it. And this time they didn't, put me on at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday. We went straight to prime time with it, not only once but twice. So, it all worked out. And then I finished up that trilogy of films with the final film called After America, After Japan, which was about the returning experience, which was something, in fact, I was even doing at that time because in the making of these films, I was essentially living in Tokyo and coming back to America really just to put water on the plants and getting back on the plane and going back to work on another movie. So I realized that my coming home experience was going to be as traumatic as the people I was talking to about, because now the bubble era was over. The Jews Senate happened in 1994. The Japanese economy was making a downslide. So Americans were being called back from Japan and Japanese were being called back from America. And everybody was making that incredible cultural, social, political, psychological, emotional adjustment to so-called being home again. But for many, and even myself included, realizing you didn't know, well, where was home now? Was home really where you were born and where you were raised, or had you developed another home through your interactions and your work? So that was the end of that trilogy of films. I started then working on a feature because that's what drew me to Japan initially. That's why I worked with Yamada Yoji. So started writing and working, and now we talk about something that took forever to do. That one was taking forever. So in the midst of that movie, the 2011 earthquake and tsunami happened. A very tragic situation. And I somehow found out about Taylor Anderson, who was one of the two Americans who unfortunately lost their lives in the tsunami that followed the earthquake. And that led to meeting her parents, talking to them about a movie that would sort of memorialize Taylor and her work there, and Monty Dixon, the other American. And that then became the fourth documentary, Live Your Dream, the Taylor Anderson story. And that came out in 2012 and is still showing many, many places. And finally, in 2016, I got to complete the feature that I had gone to do initially when I got to Japan, based on the Atagawa Prize-winning novel Cocktail Party by Oshiro Tatsuhiro. And so we finally finished that. That debuted at the Okinawa International Film Festival, and then went on to theatrical release to Yoshimoto all over Japan. So that's been a really, really good time, really good run. I'm not saying I'm done with making movies in Japan. I just don't know what movie I would make next. I mean, the ideas for movies come based upon events or history or something sort of nudges you, and you decide, okay, let's see how we can raise money again to make another
Yeah,
movie.
I was gonna ask, since time has passed, obviously, since that first film you made about Black Americans in Japan, would you ever make, I mean, I know you already have kind of like a trilogy, but like a remake of that, like for current day? And if so, what would you think about, how would you think about framing that, since you kind of described the specific cultural context of that first one there?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a great idea. It was one of the things when Alex approached me and I said, "Are you going to have somebody else on with me who's in Japan now?" Because I'd be really curious about what the experience is for people who are living there now. I mean, when I was in Japan, my goodness, I mean, you could almost count on two hands the number of African Americans you would meet in Tokyo at various events and social things. And it was always incredibly refreshing and exciting to me when I would come back over the years And it got to the point where you could go to things, there'd be so many African Americans there. You'd be like, oh my God, where are all these folks from? And they were not only all living in Tokyo, but they had all come in from other parts of Japan and were doing incredible things. So I mean, I know there's a gentleman someone has told me about who has a channel in Japan who's been sort of continuing that story of what people are doing now in Japan. And that's great because to me, the whole thing about Japan and anywhere in Asia as it relates to people of color is that I think we continue to distinguish ourselves, in these environments and allow people to see and understand us for who we are as individuals, not just a sort of a monolithic group of Americans, as it's often portrayed in the media, but a one-to-one relationship that you're going to have with colleagues, that you're going to have with friends, and that you're going to have with that particular country and place in Asia where you are. So, I'd be very excited, to maybe do a follow-up to that first film, find some of those folks because some of them are still in Japan. I mean, they're like me now. We're all gray, and some folks have passed on, and their ashes went in the Sumida River as they said they wanted to do. So I think there's a real legacy, particularly for African Americans in Japan, and I think it'd be exciting to know what people are doing now, what their experience is now, how much has changed and how much is maybe still unchanged, in terms of that perception. We're constantly fighting media perception, of ourselves all over the world, and not just in Japan, but I've spent time in China as well, in Thailand, and so, you know, we continue to have to define ourselves and distinguish ourselves.
Yep, that makes sense. Hopefully, some folks here on the call have some opinions or ideas. I know you've spoken obviously about that kind of misconception. I'm curious what other challenges that you faced in your time, coming up in your career, specifically in the film industry, but then, if there's a double filter there, like specifically in the film industry in Japan, and how, those challenges kind of shaped you or how you overcame them.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in general, I've always been interested when it comes to my personal work in telling the stories that are untold stories or underreported stories. I mean, I think the one thing I learned from working in prime time and in sort of huge, big budget television is that stories get homogenized and they get kind of boiled down to something that becomes palatable for everybody to see and hear. And most of the time, what's lost in the process is the real essence of the story, the real essence of the people. I mean, TV, to its own credit, has changed quite a bit. I mean, we all, are upset about the streaming services and all the rest of that. But the one good thing about streaming is that you're getting to see stories now you would have never seen when I was working in primetime television. And that's a good thing. Um, so I would say that's what's fascinated me. That's what's brought my attention to things in Japan, and not only my work, in film, but also I still work in the theater, and I work in television from time to time. And again, I'm always interested in the story that people don't know about, the story that maybe is not been reported at all or is underreported, and kind of trying to sweep it under the rug. Um, because to me, those are the stories that create the richness of our experience, not only in America, but around the world. And so those are the stories that, again, are often not told because these are the stories that would distinguish us. You see what I'm saying? These are the stories that would point to aspects of our life and culture and our experience that most people know nothing about. They sort of put us in a box. Well, you're a this and you're a that, and this is what you do, and this is what you do well, and you don't do these things. And as I think all of us on the call know, we do it all. We do everything. And we need to be celebrated for that diversity of expertise and of experience and of intellect. The phrase Black excellence is often spoken now. And I charge people to really define that in your work and define that in your actions, because that is what is lacking in our image around the world. Black excellence. And but that is not something to be taken lightly or taking in a very easy way. That adds to the work that we often have to do, defining ourselves in our day-to-day life. You see, survival, as we all know on the call, is the first cause of things, and especially in today's world, you know. Um, but then to meet that survival and then say, okay, I'm gonna up level this. I'm gonna kick this up a notch and be excellent at what I do. I'm not only gonna survive and get over, but I'm gonna make a mark, you know, because I will make a mark. You follow me? And so I think that's kind of what has always motivated me, not to tell the easy story, not to just fall back on stuff. You know, and again, I'm not in any way disparaging the work I did in television, you know, with some very important shows and very important people I worked with. It was all great and it was all wonderful learning experiences. But that was then. And I think the now and the future, as I'm trying to still define it for myself, and I hope everyone on the call is defining it for themselves, is what story are we going to tell today and what story are we going to tell in the future that is going to further distinguish who we are as a people and our place in history. And I think it's especially important now because we all know what's going on now, the erasure that is happening. Um, and if we don't step up and meet it for where it is, you know, history can be erased. You know, it's happened before, it can happen again.
Yes, definitely. In can totally hear that kind of paradox of like doing the challenging thing that's hard is sometimes what makes excellence. The result is something really spectacular. Um, and so I'm curious also kind of as a last question here, and then hopefully other folks have questions and we can open it up. Um, any last like advice for folks if there are any younger career people on the line here, whether they're in the art space, film space, trying to forge a path and a career in Asia. Yeah, any advice for folks in their careers?
Um, yeah, I mean, I've always been a person, and again, this has always worked for me. It worked for me in my first time, you know, out of the US was my last undergraduate year. I went to the university in Nigeria to do my final year of study, 1 year after the Civil War there. And I will never forget that experience that every day I watched the nation kind of rebuild itself from the ashes of a very incredible war. And what I took from that experience of being kind of one with all my colleagues and my classmates who a year before were killing each other, and now they were trying to work together to rebuild their nation. I took that experience and then the lessons learned from that when I went to Japan for the first time. Because the one thing that we have to do, and sometimes this is very hard to do when we're somewhere out of the American experience, is you got to get away from the other Americans. You know, you gotta be with the people. And I think that that's the thing that's important, you know, with people, young people today on the call and who are people trying to build it with the people who are around you. You know, be cognizant of that world that you're working in and how many allies and colleagues and collaborators you're going to find like right next door, you know, and if you're in that world, why not see who else in that world wants to tell that underreported story, that unusual, important story in the culture, or story that will impact a worldview. Um, because I think that's what you've got to identify. The zeitgeist, you know, is so important. We oftentimes want to go back and build our career based on the way someone else did it. I mean, all the things that have happened in my life, you know, there were plans made, and oftentimes, as the expression goes, God laughs at your plans, you know, and hands you something else, and that's what you go with. So you can make plans, but I think the biggest plan is make a plan to be open. Make a plan to walk into life with your hand always open, your mind open, ready to welcome the glad surprise. Because going to Japan today to make a film, could never go the way I went 35 years ago. You know, that was Japan then, that was the world then. And right now, anyone on the call who's, you know, a young person and looking to do some stuff, you know, get a sense of what the zeitgeist is now in Japan or in China or wherever you might be, and ask yourself, what's that story that is begging to be told? What's that truth that's begging to come out for the people here in this place and for the world to know and the world to see? And how can I be a part of that? How can I ignite that and find some allies and some colleagues and some followers and some supporters, and we can all get behind this idea together and bring it to life, you know? Because I think that's so important. You know, we often lionize people who did it this way and that way. That was then. I'm not saying that you can't learn lessons from someone else's, you know, trajectory. Yeah, learn the lessons, but be very cognizant to remind yourself where we are now, what's happening today.
Yep, that's great advice. It's often, I think, one of the most helpful pieces of advice given to me by a former boss was like, just because people with more experience have more experience doesn't mean you have to have their experience to be experienced. Something
Exactly.
along the lines of that like you can be a knowledgeable, you know, skilled person without copying the person next to you, though there's still things, or before you rather, but there's still things to learn from
Yes,
each other.
exactly. Totally. Yeah.
So great. Are there any questions? You folks can unmute. Oh, yeah, Britt, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, and do you want to pause the recording for this?
Yes, I will.
How the
Okay.
candid